Thank you for joining me in this video covering the as-built application. You will not need your total station or tablet for this video, as I will be using the simulator to present the examples used. All other lessons learned throughout this video series will work together to accomplish tasks related to this and the other two layout applications, layout points and layout lines, and should be watched for refreshers in any areas necessary. The as-built application can be found on the Icon Software's home screen within the Applications palette. If it does not appear here on your tablet, toggle it on through User Permissions. You may refer to Video 6 for a refresher on user permissions. Selecting the as-built icon takes us to the map view. Before we're able to begin storing information, we must complete a setup for the total station to know where it is in relation to the building and the control lines. You may visit Video 16 for a refresher on setups. For us to complete a setup, we must power on both the total station and tablet and connect them through Bluetooth. You may refer to Video 2 for a refresher on Bluetooth. If you do not see any points or lines on your map view to select, check that they are turned on through your Layer Manager. Refer to Video 15 for a refresher on the Layer Manager. If no CSV or DXF files appear in your Layer Manager, ensure that they have been properly loaded to the job associated with the floor you are working on, within the project you are working on, and that you are currently working in the correct project and job. You may visit Video 7 for a refresher on project setup and organization. Once these steps have been completed, we can use Move and Search to lock on the prism and begin storing information. Before doing so, we first need to define our understanding of as-built as it relates to survey software and the proper way to use this version of software. By definition, as-built drawings are a revised set of drawings submitted upon completion of a project or a particular job. They reflect all changes made in the specifications and working drawings during the construction process and show the exact dimensions, geometry, and location of all elements of the work completed under the contract. So, if an as-built drawing is a drawing that represents the exact locations of constructed elements, then the as-built software is a program that allows us to digitally draw the as-built drawing. We can achieve this by recording exact points on the surfaces of the elements, or offsets to those surfaces, and by giving the points specific descriptions that can be deciphered later by the person doing the drawing in CAD or Revit. They can connect the points stored with lines that outline the surfaces, or they can draw exact dimensions from those points to grid lines, control lines, or other features of the project representing the exact locations of the elements. This reduces the need for hand-sketched field as-builts. It's important to understand that with this equipment, we can record virtually anything you can imagine geometrically. Some of the largest inhibiting factors are loss of line of sight and lack of experience with the software. This video is not meant to be a class on as-built surveys specifically, rather on how the software itself functions. But to understand how it works, you must understand what it's doing. The as-built program records location in 3D, which means not only horizontal points and lines, but vertical elevations as well. Having explained that the program records any point you desire both horizontally and vertically, you should also understand that the program is not limited to creating record drawings to be submitted upon project completion. The program is also very useful for recording any point, for any reason, at any time. The points can later be used for the other applications of layout points, layout lines, checks, and sketching. They can also be used as control points after proper training. Also, they can be used as a method of showing the CAD techs real-world field conditions at different stages in the project for assistance with the coordination process. Once points are stored, they can be extracted and attached to emails to be sent to the parties concerned. Point extraction was covered in Video 13, Edit Points. It is very important to keep your information organized. Video 7, Project Setup and Organization, covers this in depth. Remember, points that are stored or created belong to the job they are stored or created in. This means that we should almost always create a separate job pertaining to the task at hand. For example, if I'm storing a new control point, I should be in the control job when I store it, and then return to the job pertaining to the floor I'm laying out when I'm done storing the control point. If I'm creating an as-built of my underground trenches for my conduits, I need to create a new job and give it a distinguishable name like underground as-built. Once the as-built is complete, I would then return to the job pertaining to the floor I'm laying out next. Creating a new job or entering another one for the purpose of as-built does not mean that I must import the DXF background again. Remember, you can toggle on the visibility of any other information from within another job through the Layer Manager. Video 15, Layer Manager, covers this in depth. Likewise, if I need to see the points that I stored in as-built mode while I'm laying out a deck for any reason, I can toggle on those points through the Layer Manager. Think of the as-built jobs we create in the software as storage drawers. They do not physically contain DXFs and CSVs themselves, even though their visibility can be toggled on. Those as-built jobs are created simply to hold the points stored during the as-built process. You will see examples of file organization and layer management through the course of this video. Two last notes before we dive into the program itself. First, I've mentioned working with elevations, but throughout this video series I've continued to say that setting up with elevations will be covered in hands-on training. This is true because of the different methods and prism types needed to set up with elevations depending on your circumstances. To store points with elevations, you must have your total station set up with a referenced elevation. Second, throughout your field use of the as-built program, you will find yourself in situations where you will need to use different prism types at times. Please reference video 5, Prism Types and Prism Constants, for further training in that area. Now that we've described what the program's purpose and some of its uses are, let's begin explaining the different parts of the program. We already opened the program from the home screen, and as you can see, we are first presented with the map view. Notice in the lower right corner of my screen that I have 3 buttons present: Point ID, Code, and Start. If your screen does not show these 3 buttons, please turn them on. You can do so by pressing and holding with your finger in that area. At the next screen, select those 3 options and then click the green check. Point ID and code have been covered in other videos, so I will not go in depth here. Just remember that for file management, it is important that you set your point ID and code for the points you store as you proceed through your work. Now let's cover the upper right corner prompts. The first page presents me with the information of the point I am about to store. After clicking Start, all these boxes will be filled with the information pertaining to where your Prism rod is currently loaded, and the ID and code of the point that will be stored next. N, E, and Z stand for the current northing, easting, and elevation of your Prism rod. The next page also shows you the ID and code of the next point to be stored, but now we have 2 different viewing options representing where our Prism rod is currently located. This is presented to us in line and offset format, and the starting station, or green flag if you watched video 18, Layout Lines, becomes the coordinate 0 north, 0 east, and 0 elevation. The final page presents us with more advanced information. The upper left box contains the horizontal angle right turned by the total station from its base angle to your Prism rod. The upper right box contains the zenith angle turned by the total station from its vertical plane to the point it's currently measuring. The lower left box contains the slope distance, or hypotenuse, currently being measured. The lower right box contains the horizontal distance, or adjacent side, currently being measured. Unless you understand trigonometry and have a valid reason for calculating points through a longhand method, you will not need the second and third pages of information. If you find that you do need it, I can train you on how to use it by request. Now let's cover the toolbox. The first option available is auto logging. Although this feature does have many useful applications, for the type of work that we're doing, they don't apply. The way it works is we choose a method of logging on the right side, set the interval selection on the lower left side, choose whether to use manual measurement or not, and then finally turn on auto logging at the top left. Clicking the green check would accept those methods, the red X cancels. This would be used more with civil surveying applications and especially with GPS. The next option is Shift. When properly used, this option allows us to store a point at a specific distance from the point being measured by the total station. This can be covered more in hands-on training, but I will give you one example. If I'm trying to record the face of a wall that has a 5/8 drywall in front of it while using reflectorless prism mode, I can offset the measurement by those 5/8 of an inch to achieve the true measurement. Notice that when I select Shift, 3 boxes appear in the lower right corner of the screen. The first one is line and refers to moving towards or away from the total station in a straight line. The next is offset and refers to moving left or right. The last is shifting the elevation. The red X cancels, the green check accepts the values after they've changed. The next option is close line. It is grayed now because we haven't started a line to close. To start a new line, we must first put the option of Start Line on the screen. Note that before putting Start Line on the screen, be sure to set your point ID and code first. Press and hold over the point ID, code, and store area, click Start Line, and then green check. Because I'm about to give you a live example, we first need to follow the correct procedure of creating the job to work in. I'm going to create a job called Underground As-Built. Then I'll go into As-Built and Layer Manager and turn on my background so I can see where I'm at in the building. Next, I'm going to set my point ID to something recognizable like UG1. This stands for Underground Point 1. After storing the shot, the numbers will automatically advance to UG2. Next, I'm going to create a code for these points and give them a distinct symbol so they stand out. Notice that now in the upper right corner, my ID and code appear in those boxes. Now I'll add Start Line to my screen. At this point, you would search for and lock on the prism, and then click Start. Once I'm standing at my conduit to be stored with the tip of my rod on the conduit and the rod level, I'll click Start Line and then store my first shot. Walk to your next point, repeat the leveling process, and click Store again. Repeat the process until you finish locating the conduit run. Notice that the software is drawing a line for me from point to point. We can export these lines and points and send them back to the office as as-builts. This will be covered in a future video because the method for exporting lines is different than exporting points. This eliminates the need for hand-sketched drawings as you are accurately drawing the true locations of the conduit lines while you're storing the points. Now you have a couple options. If you wish to stop the line and move on to something else, just click Stop Line. If this is a closed figure, this is where you would use Close Line in the toolbox. Notice that by clicking that button, a line is drawn from my last point to my first point, closing the figure I was drawing. Please note, if you have finished storing points or are going to store a different element, you need to change your point ID and code before doing so. The software is going to remember the last point and code you used and apply it to the next point you store, even from layout points or layout lines. If you're done doing an as-built and need to go back to layout points or layout lines, set your point ID back to 1 and your code back to no codes. If you don't do so, all your future stored points will have the same code and same method of point ID as your as-built, and it's going to mess up your layout background. The next tool is Measure Arc. To measure an arc, you must store 3 points along the arc. I'm going to create a different code and symbol, but leave my point ID because I'm still recording underground conduits. Now I'll start recording a new conduit line. At this point, let's say the run has a bend in it. I would open the toolbox and choose Measure Arc. Click Start or Store depending on what is shown on your screen. Move to the middle of the bend and click Store again. And finally, move to the end of the bend and click Store one more time. As you can see, it drew a smooth transitioning arc and connected that arc to my straight line. At this point, you can keep going with your straight line by clicking Start Line again. You can close the line by clicking Close Line, or if you've finished, you can just stop. As with straight lines, these arcs can be exported and sent back to the office, which will be covered in a future video. I'll let you imagine all the applications that this can be used for. It's not necessary to draw lines when you're storing points, but it is helpful for something like conduit runs, edge form, or anything long that should be represented as a line. I'm going to skip over the next option, which is control point, and come back to it. First, I want to show you undo. Repeatedly clicking this will undo the previous actions taken, like so. Then we have delete, which allows us to delete either points or lines as follows. Finally, let's look at control point. As previously mentioned, control points should be stored in the control job to maintain proper file management. I'm going to switch to that job and then re-enter the as-built program. As you can see, none of the conduit lines I just recorded appear here. I can go to the layer manager and turn the job on if I wish to see them, like this. That's just an example to show you that you can see any information from any job and yet maintain proper organization of information by creating a job pertaining to the task at hand. Now I'll turn it off. So now let's say I need to set a control point for future use. The first thing I need to do is set my point ID and code. I'll put the point ID button back on my screen. Then set a distinguishable ID that I'll understand, like CP1 for control point 1. Then I'll set my code to something like new control point and give it a red triangle symbol. I usually use that symbol for control because it stands out, and the triangle is typically a control point symbol, even among other trains. At this point, I'll also give it a description so that I know what to look for when I try to find that point later to use as a setup reference target. For example, I'll call this one black X because I'm standing on the concrete and marking a black X with my marker. Now lock on the prism and click Start. Move to where you want to store the point. Ensure the tip of your rod is perfectly on the black X mark you made. Ensure the rod is perfectly level and click Store. Now you'll notice the point with its appropriate name, code, and symbol on the map view. Please note, establishing new control points should not be taken lightly and is not the same as laying out points on the deck. There are specific survey fundamentals that should be taken into consideration when establishing control points. Please reference video 16, Setup and Survey Fundamentals, for some of the important considerations. At a minimum, when setting a new control point, always re-level your total station and complete a new setup anywhere. Make sure your angle is as wide as possible, and don't measure your new control point further than your longest setup anywhere control point. If possible, try to do this as seldom as possible and rely on the supplied control from the GC as much as you can. Finally, let's cover storing isolated points for various reasons. Earlier I mentioned that you should almost always create a new job when storing as-built points. I'll quickly cover a circumstance where that's not necessary. First, I'll return to a regular layout job. A good example would be a single sleeve in conflict with R sleeves. If this is a typical floor and is guaranteed to occur on every single floor, the easiest thing to do is jump into as-built, put the tip of the rod on top of the sleeve, and level up. Set your point ID, code, and symbol, and then store that one sleeve like this. Then you could export that single point and send it back to the VDC department so they can make adjustments to your point files as necessary. Be sure to set your point ID back to 1 and your code back to no codes after storing that shot. As you can see, after covering all the functions, the as-built program can be used for almost any geometrical reason you can imagine, some that weren't even covered in this video. You can even go into the checks or sketching applications and use points that you've stored for other reasons that will be covered in future videos pertaining to those applications. You can use various combinations of prism types and prism constants as well to achieve even more point locations. As mentioned in the opening comments, all previous training videos work together to support the layout applications. There are many view controls and visibility filters, search methods and point identifiers, and other various tools that can be combined to make your work faster, easier, and more comfortable for you as the end user. It is highly recommended to watch all the videos to use the equipment to its full potential. These videos, combined with the training and support recently added to the company, are here to help you in any way possible. Thank you for joining me in this video covering as-built. Please join me in the following video, which will cover the checks application.